Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Versus Stars podcast. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is an amazing episode because Annabelle Dunne boards the mothership. You know her as the producer of the Caine Mutiny Court Martial. Now come on board as we go traversing the stars.
Hello, Miss Dunn. Thank you so much for coming to Traversing the Stars podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Jeff.
It's totally my pleasure. So we start off with a question of inspiration. So inspired your love of film and who your earliest influences?
So I grew up in the 80s, and we didn't really have television. We had one VHS player in our house. My mom had one movie, Out of Africa, and my father had a different movie, Top Gun. And so those two movies had a really outsized influence on me because that was pretty much all that was available to watch. And I mean, they're both fantastic movies. I know every word of each of them. But really that kind of sweeping epic story that Sidney Pollack and Tony Scott both did just made me fall in love with storytelling, really. I didn't wind up in movies until much later.
So what do we think then of Top Gun Maverick? Was it worthy of your childhood or not?
Well, as we'll probably get into, it's really hard to do an update, and there's a lot of expectations. I think obviously Top Gun, an enormous amount was riding on that. And I think that they really delivered. I mean, obviously they didn't have their director, but I think that given the circumstances and what was sort of called for, I think that it got people back in the theater, and they had Kenny Loggins, so I think they did great.
So when did you think about the possibilities of you being able to get into film? Because like I said, you went from having two VHS as a kid to now you're a filmmaker. So at what point did that become a reality for you?
Really ass backwards, like everybody will say. I didn't go to film school. I went to Boston College. I studied political science. I think I thought I would do international diplomacy, maybe law. I wasn't really sure. But film wasn't really on my radar more than liking stories, and I'd always liked writing. But it wasn't a career unless you went to like a specific film school like NYU or USC. At BC, people weren't really pursuing that. Graduated and started working at Vanity Fair magazine. And that was a real eye-opener and an incredible way to learn about so many different worlds. But a big focus of the magazine is on Hollywood. So learning who's who, what projects, understanding the difference between a screenwriter and a director. I mean, just really like the kind of the building blocks of understanding about the industry. That's where I learned about that. And then I didn't really get into filmmaking until about 10 years ago, and I started in documentaries, and I still do documentaries a lot. And my partner, Graydon Carter, was the editor at Vanity Fair for a long time. That's how I got into documentaries, is he was sort of producing them on the side, and he said, well, you can produce them. And I said, I haven't gone to film school. I don't really know anything about making a movie. And he was like, you'll be fine. I mean, you'll figure it out. And so that was how I got into documentaries, did several of those, had a really positive experience, and then really wanted to get into scripted. And this opportunity came along just from knowing Billy Friedkin socially. And he had been thinking about making a film. It had been several years since he'd made his last film, and he's sort of turning it over. And he said, would you want to produce it? And I just jumped at it. And then I sort of stopped and went, oh my God, I don't really know how to do scripted. But like Graydon had said before, he said, you'll be fine. You'll figure it out. So.
Now, as you mentioned, learning the difference between screenwriter and writer and producer and director and all that, I wonder if many of our audience knows the difference between executive producer and producer. So what are the distinguishing responsibilities of both?
Well, look, they change. Different projects. It can mean very different things. And I think like the most general of terms, producer is really someone that is there cradle to grave on the project, takes it from almost its inception, and is really taking ownership for making sure that it gets made and it gets out in the world. And they're on set a lot. They're really integral with the director in obtaining the financing and making sure that the director's vision for the movie that he or she wants to make can happen. And then an executive producer is sometimes just a little bit removed, so they can be integral in obtaining financing, or they might be part of the distributor, so they're watching cuts, they're weighing in on creative stuff, but they're not really at the ground level. They're more sort of like top level coming down. And then, sometimes people are executive producers because they made one phone call, but it was an important phone call. So it kind of depends.
So you're now, most recently, the producer of the Caine Mutiny Court Martial, which is based on the play by Herman Wouk,
Woke. Yeah.
1953. So where and when did you first become aware of the play of the same name?
So I became aware of it because I was friendly with the director, Billy Friedkin. And Billy was a legendary director in his own right. He's won an Oscar. He's made some of really the most kind of the famous movies of his time. He did The French Connection, which won him an Oscar when he was quite young. He did The Exorcist. He did To Live and Die in LA. I mean, he's a big figure, especially in sort of 70s cinema. And I knew Billy socially out in Los Angeles, and he wanted to do the play. He was in his 80s. He was a very active physical guy, but given his age, he had done this once before with 12 Angry Men and sort of said, this format works for me with my situation now, my age as it is. It's a little bit of a more condensed shoot. It's all basically one location. And so like logistically, it made sense. But then creatively, he was just really drawn to this play. Herman Wouk was a Pulitzer Prize winning guy. It was a really big deal back when this came out. And Billy felt like it could be revisited. He felt like there were themes there that are still very relevant today, about kind of truth and power and, who's telling the truth and who's not, and the military and kind of generational stuff. So because of all those reasons, he really wanted to do it. And I was just sort of along for the ride.
Well, I mean, when you first realized that you're going to be a part of this film, did you go back and watch the play? And when you thought about the play, how did you see it from a film standpoint? Because obviously you're looking at it differently than maybe I would be watching the film. I'd be watching it probably for straight entertainment, going, do I like it or not? You're thinking, now how will this, translate? So what kind of things were you seeing? What kind of concerns did you have that, maybe there isn't a whole lot of movement, seeing movement, things of that nature? And how did you kind of approach overcoming those?
It's a good question. I think, well, that was really something Billy was very, very cautious about. And the short answer is just speed. Billy moves very quickly. He famously only does 1 or 2 takes. But what he was doing with the script from the original, and that play has been a lot of things. That play was actually a fuller movie with Humphrey Bogart, but that contained a much bigger story. And then the play itself, which was the court martial part of the story, was a film by Robert Altman, which really stuck very closely to that script. So we were essentially taking the same material that Altman had used, but we wanted to update it. And he really just chopped the script up, and he cut out a lot of things and scenes and moments that he felt like were really just kind of bogging things down. And he just wanted it to move really quickly. So, in court stuff, there's a lot of procedural stuff, like people get sworn in, they get excused. There's all these, he cut a lot of that right out the window. Like it just didn't, he said the audience is smart. They can figure out why we're here, what's going on. They don't need to see every witness get brought in, and the same thing, you're sort of falling asleep when that happens. So he cut a lot of it out. And then he kept everything else super, super, super spare. So the set is a set, but you're not really focused on the set. You're really focused just on the performances. And I think that that was an intentional choice by him. We have almost no music. There's very little else going on. You're just in this kind of pressurized room for about 90 minutes while these performances are happening.
So I think one interesting thing was, translating the 1953 play to a modern play. Now, a lot of the aspects of the film and the play is dealing with a question of potential mental illness of Captain Queeg. Now, how we view it in modern sensibilities, we're looking to be more sensitive towards issues of mental illness and things of that nature. So, how did you feel that those issues needed to be addressed in a more modern standpoint?
That's a good question. I mean, just in terms of updating, Billy did most of the updating. We had a military consultant who really worked hand in hand to make sure that everything still was factually correct the way the military is now. That was important to us, that it all makes sense, that if people from the military were watching, they would say, yeah, that's how we do it. And then in terms of how to handle the mental illness, I think Billy would answer, you're never sure. You're never sure that he is crazy. And it's really important to leave that a question mark for a number of reasons. But that was the main thing, was you're just not sure whose side you're on. And so all he wanted to do was just show the behavior, and then the audience kind of decides for themselves. Was he just under an enormous amount of stress and had been on a lot of tours and was dealing with kind of punks who weren't obeying and respecting him? Or had he really lost the plot and was endangering his crew? I don't think there's a crystal clear answer. I think it's really up to interpretation.
I'm talking about the mental illness. I think a lot of it had to do with how well Kiefer Sutherland was at portraying that. So when you're thinking about the mental illness aspect of everything, how important were picking the right actors to make this all work?
That was the most important thing, Jeff, from day one. And Billy, he had his heart set on Kiefer. He said Kiefer has a long, slow fuse in acting, and he's able to kind of unravel it or not pull it back in. And Kiefer was his number one choice. It was his only choice for that role. And so we really built the cast around that. So he had a conversation with Kiefer, maybe a year or so before. And then when we were financed and we were actually ready to go and we had a schedule, we went back and, wanted to see if he still wanted to do it. And lucky for us, he signed on. And then Jason Clarke was a great kind of counterbalance to that. Just much more sort of like emotionally available on the screen and really smart and conflicted and thoughtful. And he's a fine actor. And Jake Lacey was a huge choice for Billy as well. Lance was perfect because he was just this really composed, kind of strong anchor for the judges, who all need to be, there. It's not the way a jury works in our normal civilian court. It's like they are making the decision. So, and then I think Monica Raymond, who played the prosecution, she's a great actress as well. So we really lucked out. Those were really our choices. We worked really hard to get the cast to the right place, and that was absolutely Billy's number one priority. And yeah, once you get one, then the project kind of becomes real, and people say, okay, I guess this is really happening, and then they have so and so. It's easier to get the rest,
Now, were any of them, you don't have to be specific, but were any of them a hard sell? What was the pitch like to get them on board?
Honestly, they were not a hard sell, and that is because Billy was such a huge director. Kiefer said, I've always wanted to work with you. His father had worked with Billy, Donald Sutherland. And I mean, Billy was a legend. So no, I'm spoiled. Normally it's a much longer process, but when people found out that it was Billy Friedkin, that it was going to be in LA, which is nice, that it's a short shoot, and it was just kind of this contained little thing, was like, if they were around and they weren't on something else, they wanted to do it.
So, as once you had these actors on board, I mean, these are not small time actors. These are, Kiefer Sutherland is like his father, one of the legends in film. I mean, I remember going back to Lost Boys watching him on TV. So I mean, he's been a legend for a long time. The status of this film becomes much larger than it would have been without them involved. Was there added pressure knowing that the film was now moving into like this higher echelon of notice in Hollywood?
Yeah, there was. And we also had the best of the best crew. You just see on screen the actors. We had unbelievable cinematographer, unbelievable production designer, unbelievable casting. It takes a village. And so we had this really, really high caliber of people. And again, they all wanted to work with Billy. So it does put pressure on it, but it also really ensures that everybody's going to bring just this level of expertise. I mean, so like I told you, Billy was really 1 or 2 takes max. And that's really daunting for a lot of actors, even the most seasoned. And we had these long chunks of dialogue, with just like, that would be a lot to remember for anybody, much less trying to get it the first time. And so, there was a lot of chit chat about it. And he met with the actors and said, I really am 1 to 2 takes. I mean, I'll give you another one if you need it. But he was kind of intimidating. And so the first shoot, the first day, the first scene was a Kiefer scene. And he strode onto set, in his uniform, cameras are rolling, and he sat down and he just launched into his dialogue, and he did not mess up. And he went for I think he went like 20 pages of script, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And he nailed it. And everyone was just shocked and clapped. And it was like he brought it to that level. And then everyone else was able to kind of rise and meet him there, because that's what was happening.
Now, I mean, that's very much having to memorize that many pages at once and kind of perform it. That's very much like a theater actor.
Exactly.
I mean, were these, because I mean, I know the names of these actors, but I don't know a lot of their background. Were these theater? They didn't. I don't know about their theater background. I mean, how difficult do you think of a transition was it to try to get film actors to perform in a theater type way?
I'd have to ask them, but as far as I'm concerned, many of them already had the chops, maybe had a classical theater background at one point, like so many actors do, or it was something that they were interested in and it was a challenge and it was new, and nobody needed help. I mean, we sort of offered, do you want like a monitor with your lines? Nobody wanted that. I mean, it's almost like an insult, to say that. So no, nobody needed help. They would rehearse in the mornings before we started shooting, and they just nailed it.
Like I said, it really was a terrific movie, and I think some of it does come down to how well it's shot and how well it's acted. Because on paper, for a film, it doesn't seem like it should work. It's basically all in one scene. In many ways, not just in one scene, but it's basically in one spot in this. I mean, it's basically the chair, depending who's sitting in it, and then whoever the prosecutor or defense lawyer. I guess it's maybe the same as in military terms. I don't know if I get the military terms exactly right, but
Yeah.
that's basically what it is. But it does work. There's intensity to it. Um, how how much pressure was it on you and the director to sell it in a way that makes it that a studio like Paramount would buy in, given that on paper it doesn't sound like it would work as a film, but obviously it totally does. But obviously there's a modern sensibility of, well, how many, where's the action, where's the explosions, what's going on with all this, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think they really wanted a Billy Friedkin movie. They especially wanted one towards the end of his career. It's the last thing he made. He died in August, about 3 months after we finished the film. And so just by virtue of working with him, they were already excited. But then they knew his style, and his style, he's famous for quick cuts, things that move really fast, things that are a little like rough and gritty, and just things that kind of take you by surprise. So they knew that he would bring that approach to a courtroom, and I think they just trusted him.
Was it also Mr. Reddick's last film, or
It was really, sadly, yes. I mean, I think it was the last one he finished. That was a real shock when we found out that he had died. It was just really sad, and completely unexpected. But yeah, I think it was one of the, if not the last thing, one of the very last things he finished.
when Mr. Friedkin passed? I'm obviously sorry that happened.
Thanks.
Was it already fully edited and sent out?
It was already totally done. So he had edited it. I mean, the edit went really fast because you shoot 2 takes. It's like, do you want this one or this one? And so, yeah, I mean, he just missed, we were weeks away from going to the Venice Film Festival for the premiere, and he was looking forward to that, so he missed the entire release. But he finished the film. It was his movie.
Now, speaking of his movie, obviously there was a story that I heard about, and I'm sure you've been asked before about I'm gonna get the name wrong. Guillermo del Toro.
Guillermo, yeah.
Guillermo, sorry, I'm horrible with names. Anyone who watches the show knows I'm bad with names. Del Toro, and that he acted as a backup director for Mr. Friedkin. So, how involved was Del Toro with the actual filming process?
He was with it every day. He was amazing. He was a friend of Billy's, and we, in production, Billy was older than most directors, and you need insurance for your film, and the insurance was kind of hemming and hawing about his age, and they were concerned about it. And I won't go into the details because it's boring, but basically we needed to kind of find a backup director who, in the event something happened to Billy, would be able to finish the movie on time so that we wouldn't be late on our financing, all these things, sort of just taken as an insurance policy. And so I approached Billy and I said, we need to find a backup director. And it was kind of this awkward thing. And I just thought he was going to pick some young person that would just go in the paperwork. They didn't need to be on set. It was just like, it was an insurance fulfillment. And he called me and said, I have the guy, it's Guillermo del Toro, and he wants to come to set. And I was like, oh my God, the actors are going to like freak out. I mean, he's such a huge deal. But Guillermo was unbelievable. I mean, it was always Billy's movie. He called himself the mascot. He was so great. He was really just there on set every day to be a friend of Billy. And he would kind of observe and help in little ways here and there, but he really was there just to be with Billy. And it was unbelievable for us to have him on set because it just kind of added this level of expertise. I mean, people were already really excited about working with Billy, and then there's Guillermo del Toro every day watching you as an actor. I mean, it must have just been like, whoa. So we completely lucked out. I mean, he has a very busy schedule and shooting, and he was promoting Pinocchio, and he just did it out of the goodness of his heart. It was such an act of generosity. It was really cool.
I think that's kind of interesting because Del Toro's film style seems so unlike the Caine Mutiny Court Martial. Once again, I've seen Cabinet of Curiosity, some of the stuff. I've seen a lot of the other stuff that he does or he produces and things of that nature. They don't seem like they go together in the least.
Completely. It's like all these like minute details, and yeah, no, absolutely. But he's he's a master storyteller. I mean, he did a read of the script and already was like drawing all these amazing parallels to like Iago and Greek tragedy. I mean, he got it, and he understood what Billy wanted to do, so he was able to kind of help him make sure he achieved his vision.
Now, for a while, the fact that Del Toro was involved with the film was a secret that you guys were holding on to. Now, that's a pretty damn big secret because Del Toro isn't one of those directors that doesn't carry not only prestige with him, but buzz. Where Del Toro goes, buzz follows. Now,
Mhm.
you're trying to create a film and you're trying to hide the fact that this huge figure in film is on it. Was it this was the secret because you're I'm trying to think of the best ways to phrase it. Concerned with how Mr. Friedkin would feel about it. Was the secret because you didn't want to sell it as something that it wasn't because he was involved? What was that part like?
The secret was really Guillermo asking. He just didn't want to steal any thunder. And it was, I mean, we did our best, but I mean, if you were on set, you saw him. He was there, and he would talk to the crew, and he's such a friendly guy. So he was definitely around, but everybody just had enough sense to not make a big deal about it. We didn't put him on the call sheet every day, so there was no. It sort of was this kind of if you know thing, but really it was Guillermo saying, I don't want there to be any fanfare. This is Billy's movie. I'm just there to help. And so we did our best to honor that.
As one of the producers, is there a temptation to want to sell it as Del Toro involved Court Martial? Because once again, that name. I mean, there's a few directors in Hollywood right now that carry weight. You got Christopher Nolan, Spielberg, but Del Toro's definitely in that echelon where we're saying where things sell based on the name. Was there a temptation to kind of leak it out there, be like Del Toro film? This is part of a Del Toro, something like that as well, or was it? Um, there's a true understanding that it was just for Mr. Friedkin's film.
It really was Billy's film, and it was his last film, and I can't understand. He's a legend. And so that had its own draw. The Guillermo side of it was just kind of this nice story about a super successful in-demand director helping another director make his film. And that's why I loved the story. It wasn't because it was Guillermo, it was that, in Hollywood, people can help each other out. And there's a lot of respect for an older director who just wants to make his last movie, so much so that someone's willing to put their schedule and life on hold for like a month and go help them do it. I mean, I just think that that's the takeaway.
And I think what's so great is that from an outsider's perspective, when you think of Hollywood, you think of ego, a little bit of narcissism, a little bit of ego, and to think that does occur, that kind of altruism is, I don't know, it's hard to believe, but it's always nice to hear. Maybe that's the
Really
best way to phrase
refreshing. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Billy influenced a whole generation of younger directors, and that was evident. So that's what's cool, is that it keeps carrying on.
Now, and another very interesting about the film is that the end scene at the party, which is a wonderful thing. It's well shot and acting and everything else. It's very atypical for a Hollywood film because it doesn't have that kind of rah ending. Like, and people like talking about Top Gun. That's the ending people want.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. This one has a very almost downturn type of ending. Um, was there any pressure from studios or anyone else to try to change it or soften it on some level? Was there any concern audience would react to, or American audiences? Because like I said, we tend to be happy endings only individuals.
No, I think everyone liked the ending and thought it was thought provoking, and that it sort of fit Friedkin's style. I love the ending; it's my favorite part. I think it leaves you with questions as you walk out of like, oh wow, yeah, it's surprising, and he loves an element of surprise. And no, we had full support on that ending.
So, in your opinion, how does that scene define the movie? In your opinion.
I think it I think it just says whatever you think you know about right and wrong, it's blurry and it's murky. And um, Billy loved to operate in that gray area.
Hmm.
And he felt strongly that human nature, that we all have light and dark. and we all have the ability to do the right thing, and we also, many of us, possess the ability to do things that are depraved, and so that was really his fascination with humans. And I think that I like that scene because it's just such a classic kind of Billy Friedkin moment of turning everything on its head and um, making sure you don't have a happy ending.
Well, I mean, it does. It changes how you view the Captain Quee completely, because there's this weird kind of seesaw in the film where at the first you're wondering, is Captain Quee being unfairly victimized, and then later on you're thinking to yourself, no, he definitely has this mentality. He's definitely the problem. Then you watch the ending, you're going, wow. I mean, regardless, he deserves this level of respect and everything else. It's such an interesting roller coaster that you sent the audience through, and I think it was extremely well done.
Good. Well, thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
I really did. Like I said, it's one of those movies that you're not sure what to expect going in, but by the end, it gets you. The fact that it does stick with you and you feel that it's something that you saw something unique, especially with the twist. With not the twist ending. It's not really a twist, but how it forces you to look at things far less black and white, as you said, in this gray area than normally movies allow for. I think it was very impressive, and I think it's something to let that your brain can kind of ruminate on afterwards. And it seems like too few movies are doing that right now.
I agree with that.
So, I mean, I honestly, I know Clive saw it, but where can the listeners find Caine Mutiny Court Martial?
So it's on Showtime and Paramount Plus, and I believe that it's going to be global in a lot of their territories, starting to roll out pretty soon. I think it's also, we might need to check this for accuracy. I think it's available on demand with like an Amazon or something like that to buy, but it's for sure on Showtime and Paramount Plus.
So what's next for you?
I'm working on a documentary, back on a documentary. That's a fashion documentary, so totally different. And I'm thinking about what my next scripted project's going to be. I'm excited. I really miss Billy.
So, can you say a little bit about what the documentary is going to be about, or?
Sure. Yeah, it's about Karl Lagerfeld, who was a very famous designer. He designed for Chanel and for Fendi, and he had his own line as well. And so it's kind of a big story about his life. He was kind of a controversial character, very talented, often said the wrong thing, and we've just been getting started.
So, how are you choosing which documentary to work on? Is it your idea and then you're moving forward with something? Are people coming to you with these are some possibilities and you're choosing which one is either the most entertaining, interesting, or fascinating to you? How's these decisions happening?
It works both ways. This one was brought to us, and we loved it. Sometimes we generate our own as well. It really depends. And you never know what the distributors are going to actually buy. So you pitch them a couple things and see, and that's always surprising to see what they do and don't respond to. But yeah, we kind of we land on our subjects in all those ways. We think of some things get strictly broad. Sometimes it's a joint process. It just kind of depends on the project.
So you're also saying you're working on some scripted ones. Anything that you can like hint at, or how close are we to getting making these happen?
Not quite yet. Yeah, still sort of ironing that out. So hopefully I'll talk to you again down the road and have some good news to share.
I hope so. But as soon as you're able to talk about something, you come right back on the show to talk about it, okay?
Thank you. It's so nice to meet you. Thank you for having me on.
It's been totally my pleasure, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Take care.